Welcome to Metapod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of Metapod, Ron Crabtree.
Hello, it's Ron Crabtree here, and I want to give you a heads up that with today's recording with Henning Schwinum, we had some technical glitches with the video, so just hang with us here and we'll get through this one. Welcome back. Here in this episode of Metapod, we're going to get into this topic of how do we tap into interim executive sales talent to help boost profits and make things happen in organizations. I'm going to ask Henning Schwinum to introduce himself here in a second, but I think it's really important to think about this because what I've talked with many CEOs over the years, they all kind of run into this problem periodically, right? How do I push things, market our existing products and services more successfully, more organic growth? And then probably a bigger play in my mind for, interim executive talent is entering a new market, doing something new you haven't done before, because you get to do everything the first time as an amateur, whether you're a company or you're a person. And it always takes a long time, lots of false starts. You might waste a lot of time and money chasing the wrong rabbits. So that could be a really good play. And I suspect Henning may talk about that as well. So with that, Henning, tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for having me. Great to be here. I spent about 25 years in sales, leading sales teams, building sales teams, setting up shop in different countries. I actually started selling chemicals. That was my first product, but then moved into software, into professional services. So after 25 years, I was done with that part of my career, and 4.5 years ago started Vendox to be a matchmaker in the fractional and interim sales leadership space. I felt there was a gap. There wasn't a matchmaker focused on that particular role. And so for the last 4.5 years, we've built a roster of pre-vetted executives, and we're matching them into opportunities where companies look to grow, look to transform their sales, look to increase profitability, all those topics that we'll be touching upon today.
All right, that's awesome. So let's start out with a diagnostic of sorts, right? And, how many companies would you say you've talked to in the last 4 years about this problem growth as a guess? Hundreds?
Wild guess is probably close to 1,000 at this point. It's an almost daily conversation.
All right, very good. So this is not your first rodeo by any means. So you've got a lot of samples, a lot of data to back this up. So let's just get into a kind of bit of a diagnostic here. Companies, should I be tapping into interim talent? How do I diagnose it? Tapping into it as interim executive sales talent, something I should be thinking about. Can you share, maybe 3 different diagnostics to consider?
Yeah, there are clusters of scenarios, right? When you look at 1,000, a sample size of 1,000, there are clusters that appear. The first cluster is around growth. So companies who are experiencing problems in their growth, either not growing as fast as they'd like, or they're stalling in their growth, or they're going backwards. So anything around that is an indicator that they don't have the right talent and they need to upskill. The second scenario would be transition. When most companies start out with founder-led sales, and that means either the founder or founders themselves selling, or a founder leading a small sales team. And in any growth journey of a company, there comes a time where the founder needs to hand off the rein to a quote-unquote professional sales leader and step away from that function and work on the business more than working in the business. So transition is a second cluster. And the third one is transformation. Companies who are doing well, but they realize that they need to transform and change something because what has gotten them to where they are today is not going to get them forward. So companies who grew from 0 to 5 million now want to grow from 5 to 20 and realize they need to do something differently. And those 3 clusters or scenario clusters are very typical for us And for those, we bring in interim and fractional talent.
All right, awesome. Yeah, I love that reference to, the definition of insanity in business is doing what you've always done and hoping for something better to happen. So definitely, I really enjoyed tapping into that. So that was pretty darn helpful. I think the important thing I'd like folks to get out of this Metapod, folks who join us for this, is practical advice about how to do something about it. So let's assume our audience has done that diagnostic and said, yep, candidate. Talk to us now about maybe your top 3 things that you would suggest for the action. What do I do to properly tee up being successful if I'm going to tap into your account?
Yeah, there are a couple of natural steps to take. And when we scope an assignment together with a client, prior to bringing the executive in, we often talk about what are those steps that the executive needs to take when they come in. Because a fractional or interim sales leader assignment is a little different from, let's say, a statement of work that you would put together for a consulting gig. Because we actually have to take action, right? It's not just about analysis. But it typically starts out with understanding what's working today and what's not working today. I mean, it sounds simple, but there are these altering scenarios where people come in and they have a blueprint ready to go for what to do, and they fail to look back at the things that they've done, the company has done before, and understand whether that's working or not. And you want to?
I'd like to interrupt you there. I'd like to interrupt you for just a second, if I may. It's just something really important. Differentiating between interim talent and engaging consultants, right? So this is an entirely different thing. And one of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein is the definition of the problem is often more essential than the solution, right? So I think what you're saying here is crucial, that, you got to get really clear about what good looks like, and then get really clear about what this person needs to do. And you're right, it's very different from a consulting engagement in that respect. So I'm sorry for interrupting, but I wanted to make sure people could appreciate that.
Thank you. No, I feel the same way. There is a big difference, because the next step after the analysis is to take action. And I always, in a very simplified way, I always say that the consultant comes in, tells you what's wrong, and then they walk out the door. Whereas a fractional executive comes in, they tell you what's wrong, but then they go about fixing it. And the fixing part is very variable depending on the needs of the company. Fixing can mean bringing in new people. It can mean bringing and defining new processes. It could mean bringing in new technology. It could mean facing the founder and saying, you're maxed out. Your product and your market, that's all you can accomplish. So that part is very hard to define up front. And as we scope assignments, I tend to stay away from 6, 9, 12-month plans that are very detailed, because in my experience, the first week on the job for the executive turns that whole thing upside down, because you really don't know what you're facing until you're on the job.
Yeah, I got to interrupt. It just reminds me of the famous ancient Chinese general Sun Tzu, right? No plan survives contact with the enemy. So why get too far out in front of the headlights? I'm a big believer, if you can't get it done in 60 to 90 days, then you're going to lose focus and it's not going to be relevant, because the biggest constant is change, right? And what we thought we knew this week, the world changes, things move quickly. So I'm sorry, but I really liked what you said.
Good. Well, I appreciate you highlighting it. And those steps really hold true for all 3 of those scenarios, right? You always come in and look what works and what doesn't. And as we match talent into an opportunity, we look for someone that can truly say, I've done this before. Right? I've been in those shoes, and I've taken a company from 5 to 20. I've taken this kind of product from 5 to 20. I have transformed an organization just like yours. I have grown an organization, a sales team, from 5 to 10 over the course of 6 months. All of those things that the company sets out to accomplish is something that we like the executive to have done before, because I believe the success of an assignment doesn't lie in a prescribed methodology, but it lies in the past experience of the executive. And so our focus in bringing in the right talent lies on looking back and saying, they've done this before, and that's why they're the right fit.
Absolutely. So that kind of gets at, understanding the roadblocks and, people, the situation. What would be the next thing we really need to work on?
Well, as you transform, you want to be able to create benchmarks or have benchmarks for success. And in some industries and for some products, it's easy to come by because there are plenty of positive examples out there. In some scenarios, it's a little harder. When you operate in a niche, the question is, what is the benchmark for success here? And sometimes you have to look around the corner and maybe extrapolate a little. So, sort of in one scenario that we've staffed recently, the executive is actually looking at the company's distributors for guidance and for a benchmark, because the company itself is sort of a standalone in their space, and therefore there isn't a direct benchmark available. But you want to be able to do benchmarking in order to measure success. And as a fractional or interim of all sorts, but especially in sales, that's really important, because otherwise you work and make changes, grow the business, but how you want to be able to say, relative to the benchmark that we established at the very beginning of the assignment, we are now successful. Because otherwise you might have two very varying opinions between yourself, the executive, and the company. And, one might think we're really great, and the other one thinks the executive is doing poorly. So that's where benchmarks come in handy.
That's all right. Great. So we got benchmark. What's next after that?
Well, in a lot of cases, especially in the fractional space, the end goal, the end game for a fractional executive is always to be replaced by a full-time hire, because the executive has transformed or has put the company back on a growth path where now they require that full-time talent. And in that, they come, it sometimes is that the fractional executive becomes that full-time hire because both parties have gotten to know each other really well and they like each other and want to continue to work. And in other cases, the fractional executive then helps the business owner, the founder, the CEO to find that right talent so that they basically replace themselves at the end of the job and then move on to the next gig.
Now, I really like that because, one of the things I always insist on, when I talk with organizations that need help is, define for me what good is, but then I always ask, tell me how I'm going to measure and hold this resource accountable to get the results you expect. And I always really bear down on that. So I think you're spot on with an agreed upon benchmark. What does good look like? And we're moving toward that together. We can validate, because the last thing you can afford is be weeks or months in and find out we're not getting the traction we should, and we didn't adapt. So that was really good. Any other advice about what to do once you realize you need to tap into interim executive sales team? Any other advice for us?
Well, as I talk to business owners, founders, CEOs, I often encounter reservations about bringing in fractional talent or bringing in someone that is not full-time committed, wholly owned by the company. And especially in sales, there often is the thought that this has to be a fully owned resource to the company. How else can you talk to clients? How else can you, represent the company towards the outside? And the way to think about it is to break down a job function and really understand how much of that job is being in front of clients, how much of that job is to be the product expert, and how much of it is strategic and thinking. And many of our executives, as they're on the job, they are not the expert on the product. Frankly, companies tend to have those experts already. They don't need to bring those in. What they're lacking is the strategic sales leadership thinking, the examples from other companies and other industries where things have worked out. And that's the kind of talent they bring in. And then they need to think about and say, how much of that talent do I need? Do I need that full time? And the answer often is no. And that's when you begin to fractionalize a job and say, for example, strategic transformation of my sales team, I'm bringing someone in for 50% of their time in the fractional model. I'm paying for 50% of their time, but then I have budget left and I could actually invest in new tools or maybe a new sales rep or some other investment that I want to make within the company.
Outstanding. That was perfect. Thank you. So we're going to move into wrap up now. And I guess if you don't mind, would you be willing to share with the audience how they could get in touch with you if they'd like to ask questions or learn more?
Yeah, I would love that. I'm obviously passionate about anything sales, leadership, and fractional interim. So if you look on LinkedIn, I'm the only Henning Schwinum on LinkedIn. My name is unique, so that's an easy way to find me. But you can also go to our website, vendux.org, vendux.org, and you'll find all the information about the business there and can get in touch with me.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Henning. And thank you to our audience for joining us for this episode of Metapod.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining Metapod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.